Chapter 22. Tom Becomes a Hero. So everyone in the village was again talking about Tom. People, both young and old, respected him more and more. The village newspaper wrote a story about him, and this impressed people even more. Some thought him great enough to one day become the American president. So Muff Potter was now free again, and everyone treated him like they had before he'd been arrested. He seemed to forgive most of the people for hating him so much while he was in jail. Even though these were exciting days for Tom, he was still very frightened about Indian Joe. And Huck was also afraid. Although he was happy for Muff Potter, he was angry with Tom for breaking their agreement. He worried that some people might know that he'd been there too. But most of all, he feared that Indian Joe knew. And no one knew where Indian Joe was hiding. Chapter 23. Tom and Huck Hunt for Treasure. Every boy at some time in his life feels the desire to look for hidden treasure. Hidden treasure that once belonged to pirates. Tom now had this desire. When he looked for his friends, none of them seemed to be around. They were somewhere playing or fishing. But then Tom found Huckleberry, and even though he'd been angry with Tom, the thought of finding a lot of money made him very happy. So he agreed to help Tom.
So we'll have to look for the money on islands or under trees, or maybe even under the floors of old houses where spirits of people who used to live are. Why would the money be there?
Asked Huckleberry.
Because that's where thieves usually put their money. Sometimes they forget about it or they die, and the money just sits there. I know a house that would be good to look in, and there are lots of old trees around it. How will we know which tree to look under? We'll just look under them all.
After gathering some gardening tools, they walked out of the village to the house Tom had mentioned. Before beginning their work, they sat under a tree and relaxed for a while, because it was a hot day and Huck wanted to smoke. Tom looked at Huck and said,
"What do you plan to do with the money?" "I plan to spend it before my father takes it from me and spends it on drinks. What about you?" "I'm going to marry someone." "You're crazy to want to get married. Married people fight all the time." "Not my wife. She'll be very sweet." "No, women are all the same, Tom. Who is this girl you want to marry?" "I can't tell you." "Well, I don't want you to get married. I won't have anyone to play with. Why don't you just move in with my wife and me, Huck?"
Then they started to work. And when, after 1 hour, they'd found nothing, Huck said,
"Are you sure this is right? Do you think they'd put it so far under the ground? This may not be the right place."
They started working under a different tree, but after a while, Huck got tired again.
"This doesn't seem right either. Can we try another place, Tom?" "We could try that old house behind Mrs. Douglas's home up on Cardiff Hill." "Yes, but won't she take the money from us?" "If we find the money, it's ours. She couldn't take it from us." "Well, let's work a bit more and see if we find anything first."
After working a while longer, Tom stopped and said,
"I just remembered something, Huck. We must look for the shadow of an old tree in the moonlight. The money will be under the ground in that place."
So the boys went home for a while and met again later that evening. They started working again once they'd found the shadow of the tree. They worked hard and dug deep into the ground, but they found only rocks. Finally, Tom said,
Huck, we're wrong again. But we're digging where the shadow was. Maybe we started at the wrong time. We should give up,
Huck said.
We can't just keep guessing about the right time and place, and I don't like digging out here at night. It frightens me. I'm frightened too, Huck. The thieves almost always put a spirit with the treasure to protect it. Really? Sure they do. Tom, I don't like dead people, and they probably don't like us. Let's get out of here. I agree. Let's go to that house I mentioned to you before. Where? Near Mrs. Douglas's home. But, Tom, we just agreed not to work where dead people were. Right. So, we'll go there in the daytime. The spirits sleep during the daytime. Oh, okay. We can go if you want to, but I don't like the idea.
Chapter 24. The Old House on Cardiff Hill. The boys met at the dead tree on Saturday, and again, before starting work, they sat under the tree and relaxed for a while. When they got up to enter the old house, they found that they felt more frightened than they thought they would in the daytime. It was such a lonely, quiet, and old home. Looking inside the door, they saw a dirty floor and everything covered in dust. They walked slowly and silently through the front entrance, listening carefully for the slightest sound that might mean something was in there waiting for them. But the house remained quiet and they became less afraid, so they started to look around. They looked around every room, and once they'd finished with the first floor, they walked upstairs to the second. They didn't find anything and were going to return to the first floor when Tom suddenly turned to Huckleberry and said,
What was that? What? I didn't hear anything. There it is again. Do you hear it? Oh, my God, Tom, I hear it. Let's hide. If we hide now, they'll hear us. See, they're right at the front door.
Through a hole in the floor, the boys saw two men enter the room below. They recognized one of them from their village. He looked old and had long, white hair. People knew him as the man who couldn't speak or hear. The other man they didn't seem to know. He wore old clothing and looked very unfriendly. As they sat down on the ground, the unfriendly-looking one said,
I'm very worried that we'll be caught. I think we should change our plan.
And suddenly, the man who they believed couldn't hear or speak spoke.
You're just afraid.
Then the boys became even more frightened when they recognized the man's voice. It was Indian Joe. He continued speaking.
Relax. They didn't catch us before. Well, things were different then. I'm afraid they may find us here. I'd planned to leave yesterday, but those two boys might have seen us. You remember, we saw them playing on Cardiff Hill.
The boys heard this and started to shake even more. They were lucky they hadn't come to this house the day before. But now they wished they hadn't come at all. The two men got out some food they'd brought with them and started eating. Then Indian Joe spoke.
All right, here's the plan. You go back home after the sun goes down. Stay there until I come for you. Then we'll do one final job and run away. I'm going to rest now. Why don't you stay awake and watch for anyone who might come looking around here?
But soon both men were sleeping.
Okay, Huck. This is our chance to get out of here. Sorry, Tom. I can't. I'm afraid they'll hear us and... Fine, I'll go by myself.
But when he started to move, the floors made too much noise, and he stopped immediately, fearing he might have already woken the men up. But luckily, they were still asleep. Just as night was beginning, Indian Joe woke up and shook the other man awake.
Hey, we've got to get going soon. Where do you think we should keep the money? I can't carry $600 around with me everywhere. Let's bury it.
Then he got on his feet and went over to a place in the room where there were several large rocks on the floor. He lifted one of them and from underneath took what looked like a bag of money. Seeing the money, the boys suddenly forgot about the danger of their situation. This was the kind of treasure they'd been looking for. It didn't matter that it was Indian Joe's treasure. Then Indian Joe took out his knife and began to dig a hole in one of the corners of the room. The boys gave each other a look that seemed to mean,
"How lucky we are to have come here today."
Then there was the sound of Indian Joe's knife hitting something hard.
"Hey, look at this,"
he said.
"What?"
asked the other.
Why don't you help me here? Wait. No, I've got it. It seems to be a box."
Indian Joe pulled the box out of the hole and opened it.
"Hey, there's money here. It's gold."
Just then the other man came running over to Joe to see what exactly had been found.
"There must be several thousands of dollars here,"
said Indian Joe.
"That's great. Now we don't have to do that job in the village,"
said the other. Indian Joe looked at him seriously and said,
"I don't care about the money we'd get for doing that job. I just want to hurt the people who put me in jail before. Now, if you're going to help me, you need to go home and wait until I come and get you." "But what about this money? Do you want to bury it again?" "Yes. Wait. Maybe not."
Indian Joe suddenly stopped when he saw the boys' gardening tools in the room.
"Where did those come from? That dirt on them looks kind of new. I think someone's been here. We'll have to put the money in the special hiding place under the cross."
Then Indian Joe stood up again and looked out all of the windows.
"Whoever put these tools here may still be here. They may be in the room above us."
Then he picked up his knife and started walking toward the stairs. The boys didn't know what to do. They thought that this would be the last minute of their lives. With each step Indian Joe took on the stairs, the boys felt more and more afraid. But then came the sound of wood breaking, and through the hole in the floor, the boys saw Joe fall to the ground.
"Damned old house,"
he said, getting back on his feet.
"No one could have walked up there. I guess they must have seen us and quickly left."
The men gathered the gold and put it into the bag with the rest of their money and left the house. The boys just stayed where they were until the men were far away. They didn't even speak while they waited for the right moment to go back downstairs. They were afraid, but they wanted that money, so they agreed to find Indian Joe when he returned to the village, and then they'd follow him to the secret hiding place he'd mentioned. Tom wondered whom it was that Indian Joe wanted to hurt. He wasn't sure if it was he or someone else. He would find out soon. Chapter 25. Was it all just a dream? Tom had difficult dreams that night. All he could think about was the money. Each time he dreamed that the money was his, and he imagined himself spending it in all kinds of ways. Buying a new house for his aunt, buying himself a nice boat, and so on. But with each dream, disappointment followed, because he would wake up and find himself the same young man whose most valuable possession, was a gold ball, which the girl he loved didn't want. Tom had never seen so much money before. It was almost unbelievable to him that someone could have found that much money in his village. Then, he began to doubt that any of it had been real at all. He thought that maybe the whole thing had been a dream. Early next morning, Tom went looking for Huckleberry. When he found him, he planned not to say anything about the money. If Huckleberry didn't mention it, then Tom would know it had all just been a dream. He found him at the river, sitting on the side of a boat, looking sad.
"Hello, Huck." "Hello."
Huck was silent for a moment, and then he said,
"We were so stupid to leave our tools down in that room. We could have found that money instead of Indian Joe. Wow, it wasn't a dream." "Dream? No way. If those stairs hadn't broken when Indian Joe was walking up them, we wouldn't be here today. Huck, we have to find him. We have to get that money. I remember them saying something about number 2 when they were talking about the secret hiding place. It could be the number of a house or something. But none of the houses in this village have numbers. Well, maybe it's a room number in one of the public houses for travelers." "You may be right, Tom. This village only has 2 of those. Wait for me here, Huck. I'll be right back."
A half-hour later, Tom returned. He'd asked about room number 2 in both public houses and found out that in one of them there lived a young man whom everybody knew, but no one was sure who lived in the other public house. One man said that, the night before, he had seen a light in the window there.
"That must be Indian Joe's room, Huck." "Yes, it must be. So what's our plan, Tom?" "Well, we still have to make sure that it's Indian Joe's room. If you see him sometime in the next day or 2, follow him. If he doesn't go there, it must not be his room. If it is his room, I think we should be able to easily get in at night, because the entrance is around the back and no one will see us." "I don't want to follow him by myself, Tom." "Well, you know he won't come to the village until dark, so he probably won't see you. I promise you that I'll follow him if I see him. You have to be strong if you want to find that money, Huck."
Chapter 26. The Public House. 3 nights later, the boys waited until dark and then went to the public house. There wasn't anyone around when they got there. Everything had been closed about an hour earlier. They went around back to where the door for room number 2 was. The plan was for Huck to be the guard while Tom went inside to look around. They silently approached the door. Tom turned the handle and, with a little bit of trouble, he managed to open the door. He went in and Huck stayed outside as planned. He waited for Tom for what seemed to be a very long time. He started to fear that something had happened to him. He began to fear that Tom would never come back out. But then the door suddenly opened and Tom ran out without turning around to look at Huck. He just yelled out,
"Run! Run! As fast as you can!"
So they ran and they didn't stop running until they had arrived at the opposite end of the village, where their usual hiding place, the old empty building, was.
"I was so frightened, Huck. You remember when I tried opening the door but couldn't? Well, then it was suddenly very easy to open. I didn't know why. I walked in and soon felt something under my foot. I looked down and saw that it was Indian Joe's hand." "No way." "I'm telling the truth. He was totally drunk and must have been going to open the door when he heard me trying to get in, and then I guess he fell asleep while doing it. Lucky for me. So Did you see where that box was? What? Are you joking? I just turned and ran. I didn't get to see anything, Huck. If he's drunk, we should be able to get that box easily, Tom. Okay, then you go and get it from his room. I'm not going near there.
Huckleberry thought about it for a moment, but then said,
No way. Listen, Huck, wait until we know that Indian Joe is not in there. Then we can go fast and get that box. We'll just wait until he's not in his room, then we'll go and get the money. Sure, I'll watch the room and then let you know when they're gone. Okay, you know what to do. Come to my window and make a noise like a cat.